really talk about what that means to the seller. Okay? Now, when we're talking about what the seller, some of the skills that they should be applying, you'll see that one of the toughest things about a sales process is really identifying where the customer is in that sales process. It would be nice if they start from the beginning and nicely and neatly worked their way around the process, but that's not always the case. So what we're going to do as a seller, we're going to look at the model, we're going to look at the intent of the model, and you'll see that there's various decision points that really allow you to assess where this particular customer is in the process. In fact-finding, what we do in fact-finding is we ask customers questions about their current situation. Okay? So you might ask, you know, how many employees, how many locations, what is their particular process for handling their documents, let's say. You might also uncover how they go about making purchasing decisions. Okay, so essentially what you're doing in the fact-find stage, you're attempting to understand their current situation. Okay, you're attempting to establish in your mind what this particular customer, who they are, what they do, perhaps information about their current customers. We then move into something called the probe stage. Probe stage is really where we ask questions to really understand some of the issues and concerns associated with their current situation. Okay? Some of the words that can help you in asking some of these probing questions are things like, you know, what are your issues? What are your concerns about how you're doing this particular process? Okay? So what are some of the likes and dislikes? What are you worried about? What keeps you up at night? And this is really one of the most important parts of the sales process, because this is really where you uncover what brought them from the unaware stage to the aware stage. So this is where you start to understand service problems. You had to replace the motor. The brakes went out. They're spending too much money. And you'll find that these are actually the motivations for change. Would you agree with that? Okay. We don't just jump from making a purchase and then deciding, even though there are some people who make some impulse purchases, but usually there's something that's driving them to make that change. And it's important that we uncover that so that we can help them establish criteria that hopefully are going to be to your company's strengths and to competitors' weaknesses. Inside of probing, there's something called magnifying. As we uncover some of the issues and concerns associated with their current situation, in asking magnifying questions, what we're attempting to do is really to identify the effects of some of those problems. Okay? How did it affect you when your brakes went out? Okay? When you were driving your child to school, how did that affect your situation? Right? The more we can ask these magnifying questions and really equate them to things like lost time, lost money, lost productivity, okay, the better, the more motivated the customer is going to be to make a change. There's something called upside magnifying. In upside magnifying, what we're attempting to do is really the opposite effect. Instead of creating that fear, uncertainty, and doubt with these good open-ended magnifying questions, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to assess what would be the impact to you if you had a car that not only is going to meet your needs, might possibly exceed your expectations. How do you think that that would affect you? You might hear peace of mind. I'll feel safe. Okay? And more importantly, if it meets my requirements and exceeds them, I'll be happy. Okay? So when I go through that review stage, it would be one that I'm satisfied with, and perhaps so satisfied that they might tell other customers about that good experience. So can you see how getting inside some of these issues and concerns, how that's going to really start letting us, you start to think through what's going to be some of the motivations for change. After we ask probing questions, we move to what we call the agree stage. Now the agree stage is really where you bring the situation all together, okay? You're going to summarize, you're going to share some of the things that they told you, okay? That's why it's so important to take good notes, because they're not going to always remember all of the things that they shared with you. So good selling skills involve taking notes, having good body language, some good eye contact. So what you're essentially going to do at the agree stage is you're going to summarize for them. Okay, and an example would be, Mary, you shared with me that your Saab is having service problems. It's a 1995, so it's getting up there in age. You had to replace the motor, your brakes went out, and you're really spending too much money. Is there anything else that was going on with this car? They may add something, they might not. What we're going to then ask, which is what we call the first decision point, is, given your situation, Mary, you're going to look at taking some sort of action. Are you going to look at alternatives to your current situation? Are you going to consider possibly trading that car in? Okay? When I had mentioned prospects and suspects, this is really where you make that determination. Okay? How many of you buy a car and drive it until you've paid it off and then at a future time just trade it in? Okay, we have a couple of you. How many of you lease a car? Okay, one or two. And how many of you drive a car until you're left with the steering wheel? Okay, 3 people. So there's all these types of purchasing patterns for the same item, which is a car. It's important that we make that assessment early on, because although they might all be driving, you know, the same type of car and perhaps even the same age, it doesn't always translate into action. Typically, what we as salespeople do sometimes, we ask a question, we ask a probe or two, and we immediately jump to the recommendation. And then we wonder why the customer, you know, kind of pushes back, and then you start hearing objections, you start hearing about price, and it's because they haven't come to the same conclusions that you as a salesperson have come to early on. That's why I always say we call it buyer-focused selling and not seller-focused selling. At the agree stage, you're asking that first